Hello and welcome back to my author live stream. This is going to be the second episode. Last time we began working on plotting out the topics, what's going on with this second book. Just a reminder, this book right here called The Imperfect Church is the first book that I authored. Published it kind of late last year. And the whole idea is, what does a healthy church look like? But I want to tell that story in a different way, because there's been any number of people who have written about what a healthy church is. I want to tell the story not only in a captivating way, but in a way that actually demonstrates what it looks like to enact the changes that the book exposes. So that's why I wrote it in novel form. And last time, this is kind of what my plot map looked like. This is software called Obsidian that I utilize for... Well, I tried to utilize it for the entire authoring process last time, and I figured out that that is just a mess if you're trying to do a lot with the book publishing. If it's going to be anything at all intricate, you kind of have to go to a dedicated software. But Obsidian is great for mapping out what you want to do in the book. So this was that plot map of that first book, and you can, look into this and zoom in and see all these different topics and things. And so we're beginning to do that for book number 2. First book focused on what does it look like for a big church that has grown through unhealthy means to take a shift towards health. Second book is going to be, what does it look like for a church that is stuck in a small size because of unhealthy issues? What does it look like for a church like that to become healthy? And so that's what we're going to be working on today, is tackling a few more of these topics. Now, I do want to just emphasize one thing really quick here, and that would be that being a small church does not equal being an unhealthy church. Being a small church doesn't mean that you've fought the right battles. You might have negative things holding you back. So small, big, not an indicator of a church's health. I would think that, if we're really mapping this out with intentionality, both a small church and a large church and a medium church are going to have different ways of understanding health, but each of those types of churches has ways of being healthy, ways of being unhealthy. So we're focusing in on small church problems. Now, last time, I'm not going to just overview it all. If you want to watch, you can check out the last episode. But we talked about the idea of not doing everything and doing a few things really well, looking at Acts 6, 1 through 4 it was. And then also looking at this idea of what does it look like to create an onboarding path for someone to go from being completely disconnected unbeliever to being a fully built up leader in the church. And then finally, we looked at this idea of time is precious and resources. When you look at the resources, time is unique and that it is a fixed resource. Energy and money each have kind of unique things going for them that makes them much more flexible. Time, you just can't get more of it. You cannot buy time. It evaporates at a fixed rate. So we talked about how a lot of small churches get in this place where they are locked into their unhealth. Why? Because they're wasting their time. By the way, if you're joining me, would love for you to drop a comment in the chat. Let me know if you can hear me. All those good things that us streamers need help with, I would love to get your help with and just engage with you. Last time I got to meet an amazing person who was in the chat, giving lots of input, lots of pointers, and who is an author himself. So, make sure to engage and be a part of the community. So let's dive in. I'm a verbal processor, so this live streaming and talking about things as we're working on it is actually really, really good for me. Victor, you're here again, my man. I'm a bit low. Okay. I'm going to turn up a little bit or try to figure out how to do that. Let's go like this. Hopefully that's a little better. Victor, it's good to see you again. It's good to read your name. I did get your email, brother, and I just want to make sure I put together a thoughtful response. Just looked at your book, kind of the website that you shared looks really cool, and I want to commit to reading it, but also need to make sure I'm not overcommitting to something. But it's going to happen at some point. That's better? Okay, sweet, man. Dude, so we're going to be tackling 3 things today is the plan. First of all would be zero tolerance for bad behavior. I find that small churches have a high tolerance for bad behavior, like unhealthy small churches. And then secondly, sometimes bad church culture just needs to die. And then finally, are there idols keeping you from fixing your eyes on God? Grind them up. And actually, why don't we go ahead and start with that one? Because I think that one's a little bit more cut and dry, and we can just kind of launch into that one and hit a home run right out of the first inning, which I think would give us a bit of momentum going into this kind of brainstorming and planning session. So let's pull these down. Okay, so are there idols keeping you from fixing your eyes on God? Grind them up. And let's look at Exodus. Let's see, my mouse is lagging again. What is it? Exodus 10, I want to say? No, it's way later than that. Exodus 24? Nope, it's before that. Maybe. I think I'm going to have to resort to Google here. Sometimes I cannot remember where in the Bible I'm looking for. There is a specific passage that talks about Moses grinding up the golden calf. And in my Bible software, I do have ways of searching for these types of things, but I just find that sometimes Google is faster for just identifying a verse. Yeah, see, just like that. So we are in here with the golden calf. Let us take a look. Now when the people saw Moses was delayed in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come make us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses who brought them up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him." So Aaron told them, "Take off the gold earrings that are on your wives and sons and daughters and bring them to me." Reminder, this would be the pillage that they took from the Egyptians and from the bridesmaids. Not bridesmaids, the birthing help in Egypt. There were a lot of supporters in Egypt of the Israelites, so they gave them this money. This was what was going to be used to make the tabernacle. Okay, then all the people took off their gold earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took the gold from their hands, and with an engraving tool he fashioned it into a molten calf. And they said, "These, O Israel, are your gods who brought you out of the land of Egypt." Great. Now, going on here, skipping forward to 7. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go at once, for your people whom you brought out of the land of Egypt have corrupted themselves. How quickly they have turned aside from the way that I commanded them. They have made for themselves a molten calf and have bowed down to it. They have sacrificed to it." Okay, we continue on. Okay, I'll make you into... Okay, came down, relanted. Moses went down. Here it is. Joshua, Moses. Okay. Yep. Make sure. Okay, he sees this. Here it is. This is the verse I'm looking for. 19. It says this: "As Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, he burned with anger and threw the tablets out of his hands, shattering them at the base of the mountain. Then he took the calf they had made, burned it in the fire, ground it to powder, and scattered the powder over the face of the water. Then he forced the Israelites to drink it." He forced the Israelites to drink it. Oh my goodness. So not only did he destroy the false idol, but he gave them a symbolic punishment that had to do with this way that they had been idolizing a false god. This is Exodus 32. We're looking specifically at 19 and 20. So let's create those scripture tags in Obsidian. So Exodus 32:19. Exodus 32:19 will be 1, and we'll also create Exodus 32:20. Whoops. Sometimes it does that, where it opens up another one. We'll create a new note. Exodus 32:20. Okay, so let's work on this. We got our Bible tag. We are using BSB translation, which is a translation that I like. And we're in the Old Testament, so there is no Greek for me to look at, unless I want to look at the Septuagint. So there's that. We're just going to get these verses in at the very first. And then we'll probably do just a little bit of light exegesis on these texts here. I've studied these before as I've taught on them for other things, but I want to make sure that I'm not from the jump falling into some sort of exegetical trap here. You'd probably have to zoom out a little bit, but let's look at our commentary list here. By the way, if you're with me, welcome. This is an author live stream. I am a Christian author who has written a book. It's right here where my finger's pointed. It's called The Imperfect Church, and we're doing a bunch of plot mapping for the second book. Right now doing some exegesis so that we don't step into a interpretive hole, if you might say. So let's see, is there a author that I like that has a commentary on the book of Exodus in my library? I'm going to go with Douglas Stewart from the New American Commentary. And we're going to resume, or rather rewind. And we're going to do just a little bit of reading here. Okay, I want to look specifically at 20. Right here. Let me make this bigger. If you're on a small screen, I recognize this is probably a little bit hard to read. I like to have small text when I'm doing Bible study with software so I can see more. Okay, so here's the comment on this verse. Moses did everything he could to destroy the bull idol permanently and desecrate it fully. Because the idol was made primarily of wood overlaid with gold, it could be burned. So Moses burned it in a fire and then ground up the resulting charcoal and gold slag into a powder, presumably with a group of mortars and pestles used by people to whom he delegated his task, and then threw the powder into the drinking water supply, the flow of water at the base of Mount Horeb, known as Massa or Meribah, which is talked about later in Deuteronomy. So this statement, then it goes on to say, he made the Israelites drink it, may not be the best translation of the Hebrew, and at any rate probably does not mean he had them all line up and drink some as an organized group punishment. Okay, helpful. Rather, it means that by putting the powder into their water supply, he saw to it that eventually the powder was drunk along with the water, and thus went through the Israelites' body, came out as waste, corrupted and defiled, and therefore was ruined permanently as material fit for an idol. Wow. That is so vivid to me. The idea of taking the false god, and you're not just eliminating it, right? Like that was a principal part, making sure it was fully eliminated. Making sure it was fully, we're going to write this down, fully eliminated was important, but there was something symbolic that was probably happening as well. How is something you defecate How is something you defecate worthy of your worship? And so there's almost this act of humiliating the false idol. Maybe that would be the best way to understand it. Okay, I don't know if I'm spelling that right. We're going to go ahead and put New American Commentary. This is kind of my system, so I make sure that I remember. Go ahead and try to extract the gold if you really feel like it. Yes, Victor. Give it a shot. See what you're going to find. And we'll make that bigger. When you identify a false idol as a leader of the people of God, you need to handle it with... My feed died. Oh, it did, didn't it? It's probably because I'm on Wi-Fi. Victor, tell me if I'm back now. Okay, it's back. Yeah. There's a weird thing on Mac where when you've plugged into Ethernet, you have to actually disable your Wi-Fi. It doesn't just automatically default to using the Ethernet for some reason. So I had my Wi-Fi on still and probably had unstable connection. Thanks for the heads up, bro, by the way. Mouth is out of sync. Yeah, I don't know what to do about that. It might just need to catch up. You might try reloading the page too. But by the way, Victor, super helpful to get your kind of immediate feedback. because I'm very new to streaming. So I really don't know a lot about this. So, I could do an hour and a half long stream with no one being able to hear me, and that would not be good. So, tell me if you reload it, if it's better. Hopefully the audio and the video syncs back up well, but we'll see. Okay. So when you identify a false idol as a leader of the people of God, you need to handle it with brutality. That's what I'm seeing. And I want to bring in here, we're going to bring in this Exodus 20 passage here. And I don't need to show the whole thing, but I do want to show that there's a link here. So we'll just go like this. I'll even make it smaller. So now, I guess maybe some questions we might ask of this. And let's do it this way. Questions. For us to really establish a strong exegetical link here, I think we'd need a couple other things. Does this really apply to let's see. Yeah, let's go broader. Does this really apply to church leaders? Moses was special. Seriously, significantly special. So that'd be the first question. Does this really apply to church leaders? Great. Does this mentality hold true? Reloading fixed it. Perfect. Okay. Does this mentality hold true post crucifixion, we'll say? I think if you had a bad method of interpreting scripture, you would say God changed. You would say that Old Testament God is angry, fiery, so are his people. New Testament God is, unicorns, butterflies, and rainbows, and so are his people. But I think this is a pretty, at least in my mind, that's a pretty easy no. Let me do it like this. But we're going to put it there. I want to make sure I'm documenting this. And then does this, are there any questions? What does doing this in today's context look like? Well, and you might say, what does doing this with a non-captive, audience look like? And this would be like the task of the hermeneutic here. So maybe we understand what the original text means, but how do we apply this? That would be the question here. And that's probably a worthwhile question, because it's certainly not going to look like literally grinding it up and putting it in water. You might have jail time on your hands for doing that in today's day and age. Now, I'm okay with going to jail for following God, but the question comes is that really what God is wanting from us as leaders? So what does it look like to apply this concept in today's day and age is a good question. Let's think of some depictions. I think on this side we were doing, what does it look like? So a church that has idols that are keeping you from fixing your eyes on God. So does this command apply to each of us in our daily routines? 100%. Yeah, the pastors have not replaced the priests. That's a very good point. Theologically, we have each been invited into a royal priesthood, Hebrews, and Jesus is all of our high priests. Yet, Moses wasn't a priest either. He even wasn't assumed into the priestly role. He had a role of leader, and I think that is more synonymous with elders or pastors in churches, although Moses to a much higher degree, leading, a group of 500,000 plus people at the beginning that multiplied times 3 within just a few generations. So, I think that's a good point. We are definitely all called to do this in our daily lives. None of us are supposed to hold to idols. But as far as this passage of Moses, I do think there is some sort of a parallel to a church leader today, albeit, twisted and morphed to fit properly. It's kind of like in the Old Testament there is a passage that talks about needing to have handrails on your roof. Let me see if I can find this passage real quick. Maybe you could tell me if you're a Bible nerd more so than I am. It's in the law. I think it's in Deuteronomy. Passage about railings on roof. Yeah, Deuteronomy 22:8. 22:8. And let's do it in the right window. Deuteronomy 22:8. I'll put this up. So this is what it says. If you build a new house, you are to construct a railing around your roof so that you do not bring blood guilt on your house if someone falls from it. So that's like a very specific command. But we don't do this today. Should we do this today? And I think a clumsy interpreter of the Bible would just say, we're not under the law anymore. You don't have to do any of this anymore. But then you look at the law and you see all sorts of things that every Christian everywhere would say, no, that is a command of God. So how do we understand this? Well, I think there are different types of laws in the Old Testament, different types of communications from God. And this communication in particular had a lot more to do with the context of the people. So they built houses that had flat roofs. The rooftops were very much so a hangout place. You would spend your time on the roof, particularly in certain times of the year where the weather was good. So there was a problem. Like, this law was the result of a problem. There were certain roofs that just had no railing on the edge. You can imagine, a kid's walking and trips and falls off a roof and dies. So because of the circumstances, this law was commanded. Now, is this law irrelevant? Absolutely not. It is very relevant still. I'm reading what you said, Victor. Let me touch on that in a minute here. This law very much does matter still, and it just has to be applied properly. So maybe it's about handrails with stairs. Maybe that would be too linear or too like one-to-one of an example. But this concept of when it's your property and just by people being there, they are bringing a risk onto themselves of extreme bodily injury, we should do our best to prevent that. Hand railing is a lot less of a thing to do than, a funeral for someone's child. So I think that's what we're doing here. Like this passage with Moses grinding up the idol, it's not a one-to-one. Like, the answer would not be to go into a church and if they're idolizing worship, to crush up the drum set and all the stuff, and then, literally add it to the water in the church so everyone drinks it. And then a month later, you're like, ha, gotcha. Like, you've been drinking the worship supplies. But I do think there is a parallel and something we can glean from this. Now, Victor's question, he says this: for brainstorming sessions for myself, it helps to know how the general context these questions are going to factor into your story. 100%. And I'd say right now, kind of my plan for brainstorming, and actually it'd probably be good to just put this out there. Plan for second book brainstorming. Let's do this. I'm going to pull this off to the side here so we have it. For now, I'll probably put this away later. But my plan at first is just topical. So I want to look at what are the topics that I plan to cover. I've already kind of identified the larger topic at hand, which is, put it here. What does solving the biggest small church unhealth problems look like? Now, Victor, you might not be aware of this, but my first book is a novel, and it follows a pastor through solving these problems in his church. He has these dreams and a visit from a messenger that essentially teaches him the errors that he's made, and then he has the responsibility of taking that and applying that in the church context. Book 2 is going to be a little different than that, but it's going to follow a similar format. So book 2 is going to talk about, these problems we're brainstorming in some sort of narrative sense. And there's going to be that same concept of teachings and then, primary characters applying those teachings in the context of their small churches and what effect that has on the church. So that's going to be the general format. I'm going to kind of keep it the same probably for all 3 books with some differences. It's not going to be dreams this next time, I don't think. So first, I feel like what I'm doing now is, identifying what these biggest problems are. And I want to, have some depth of knowledge about that before I go into actually storyboarding. So we're going to go topical, then we're going to go practical. So how are we actually going to talk about these problems? We're going to start brainstorming different characters, kind of plotting out the linear track of the book. And then I'm probably going to create some attack plans for how I'm going to tackle writing the book. So, is there a particular chapter that I want to start with? Are there some proof of concepts that I want to create first? And then, setting up my project. By the way, one thing I wanted to say to you, Victor, and I don't know if you're going to encounter the same issue, but I encountered an issue with using Obsidian as an author. And let me do one thing right now. This is where we are right now. So one issue I encountered using Obsidian as an author was I used I think it's called LongScript plugin. This is a nerdy thing, so if you're not into Obsidian, you can just zone out for a minute or stay with. I think it's called Longform. Let me check here. Longform. Yep, the Longform plugin. So this plugin is all about using Obsidian to write a book. I don't know if that's what you're using, Victor, to write your book, but I hit extreme limitations when it actually came time to edit my book. So when it came time to do beta readers, proof editing, and then I hit extreme limitations when it came time to do formatting. So I actually had to spend basically an entire week just transferring over my entire project to another software. So this time, right from the jump, when it comes time to start writing, I'm going to be using my other software for writing so that I don't have to do all that work again. And it handles the footnotes a lot better than Obsidian is able to, even with all the footnote plugins installed. All of them. Seriously, I tried to do everything to make it work. So something to think about. I use Obsidian as my Codex Wiki to do my actual Novel Crafter. I haven't heard of Novel Crafter. It's your favorite writing tool ever. Let me look into that. I use Scrivener. I really like that software. Is Novel Crafter... Here's some questions. Is it web-based or is it software-based? Interesting. Okay, it's not too bad. Like $4 or $8 a month. Yeah. What do you like about Novel Crafter? You kind of use Obsidian like I use it for plotting and planning, or how I should have used it for the first book. So, okay, let's jump back into this. Victor, tell me what you like about Novel Crafter, because I'm curious about that. I'm going to keep working on this. So, are there idols keeping you from fixing your eyes on God? So, an example of this in a church would be getting overly emotional about something being changed. I think this can be a strong indicator of something that's an idol. And I have encountered this so much in church world, being overly emotional about things getting changed. You've used Scrivener. Novelcraft is very much like it, but more streamlined, and it's web-based. Okay, cool. Yeah, I like that. Novelcrafter. Do you use, Victor, are you planning on publishing the book physically once you complete it? All right, let's press back in here. So we're looking at some portraits of what it looks like. So that's one example. Yeah, I think you dump a disproportionate, let's say it that way, a disproportionate amount of resources into creating and protecting the idol. If you tried to post a link, it looked like it was redacted. So are you planning on doing self-publishing? I'm imagining you are, since you're already doing some distribution. It's very hard to get a publisher to publish you once you've done any sort of distribution. Victor, do you use Mac or Windows? I'm just asking you a bunch of questions now. I see I got 2 viewers, so if there is someone other than Victor in there, I would love for you to comment so I could meet you and so I could say hi to you. I'm an author, by the way. We're doing a live stream writing. So you dump disproportionate amount of resources into idle. We'll just say it that way, idle. Okay. And then finally, let's think of one more portrait descriptor of this. Maybe it'd be people who mess with the idol are tossed out. I like that. Okay, yeah. The other books will become more like normal books. So you'll write the following books and kind of publish them all at once where someone would read it beginning to end. You're serializing the first one to develop a following. Yeah, very cool, man. Software called Vellum that is really, really great for formatting the book. Highly recommend it. It's expensive, but if you're on Mac, it is worth it. It's only on Mac, though. Okay. So I think here an important thing that is going to kind of hedge in here. PC and Android. Yeah. Yeah, so you don't have access to Vellum, which, there's options on every operating system to do good formatting of ebooks and physical books, but Vellum is just such a game changer, and it's Mac only. I have a huge Windows machine sitting under my desk here that I built myself, so I get the Windows world. I was Windows for many, many years, and then I converted, if you will. Yeah. By the way, I meant to tell you, I do video production by trade as well. So we have that in common as well, Victor. One thing I want to hit on here is, there's some sort of a delay on the stream. I don't know if maybe there's a way for me to change that. Yeah, I think I'd have to change it from the beginning, though, because I just have normal latency. So I think it automatically puts a delay on it, but I'll look at changing that next time. That's probably annoying since we're going back and forth. You're talking with someone who only sees what you say 30 seconds after you say it. We'll try to get it worked out next time. Okay, let me do this. So leaders who enable this are emotionally immature. I want to bring in a book here, which is the book called, I don't remember. Yep, I do have Failure of Nerve. Okay, so here are some of my highlights from a book called A Failure of Nerve. Okay, this is the quote I want here. So whenever a family is driven by anxiety, what will also always be present is a failure of nerve among its leaders. So we're gonna do this. We're gonna go a failure. No, not gonna do it like that. I'm gonna do it differently. I'm gonna do an embedded quote. So failure of nerve highlights. We're gonna come back in. We're gonna search for family. Or we'll just go down because it's close to the top, right there, like that, just like that, and that'll be failure of nerve. So I want to bring in that concept from that book. So failure of nerve talks about the idea of emotionally immature leadership. So, and specifically like anxious leadership. Yeah, you noticed my production company leaks and thought that was another. Yeah, that is interesting. Victor, it's so crazy that you just popped in the live stream, because I really feel like, you know, like you said, things don't happen for an accident, right? I think God might be orchestrating just an opportunity for, you know, us to know someone who does similar things to ourselves. That sort of community of having people with similar passions is just so important and so meaningful. So, dude, I'm so blessed by having you here in the live stream. And I don't expect you to be here every time. I know, you know, we have busyness in our lives, and but I'm so blessed by you being here, so we can bounce some ideas off each other, and so you know, I don't have to pretend like I'm talking to someone. I'm actually talking to someone. It's cool. So I appreciate that, man. Okay, so let me collapse this here. We're gonna go side by side for a bit here. Let me think. So I have this idea of leaders who enable this are emotionally immature. Well, and I'd say maybe let's specify, because I think what he uses the term emotionally immature. But I'm gonna say anxious and cater and are, no, let's just say are serially anxious. That might not be exactly what I'm trying to get at here, but I think the point I'm trying to make is that there is a type, if you will, of leader that tends to enable this. There is a specific type of leader. Yeah. Oh, you have a writing group. Is that like an in-person group, or is it online? Okay. We're going to call this Idle Grind. I'm just picking goofy names. And then let's group these together. We'll call this Portraits, just like before. And we'll color that orange. I think that's what I did last time, right? I did red. So we'll color that red. Okay. Is there anything else I want to include in this? We're talking about idle grind. Let me go here. So yeah, we're looking at idle grind specifically. This idea of, are there idols keeping you from fixing your eyes on God? Grind them up. And some portraits of that, you know, the congregation gets overly emotional about something being changed. They dump disproportionate amounts of resource into the idol. People who mess with the idol are tossed out. And then when you identify a false idol as a leader of the people of God, you need to handle it with brutality. We're looking at this Exodus 32:20 section, and then maybe some of the questions we'd have to ask to properly have a hermeneutic on that. And then I think a huge thing in the book that we're going to look at is, you know, there's going to be people in the congregation who create this idol, but then you have anxious leaders. And I think this is brilliant, hinges back in right here, because what did Aaron do? And we could even just put that here. What did Aaron do? We'll go like this. What did Aaron do? He just let it happen. He was supposed to be a leader, and when the people demanded this idol, he just submitted to it. What a loser, right? I can't say that I would necessarily do better given the situation. You know, we never want to look at the Old Testament and be like, oh, what idiots, you know. They weren't as good as me. We don't want to do that, because then we're going to fall right into the trap. You meet every other Monday. It's a peer review group where we critique whatever our latest chapter we upload to the group page. The feedback is in person. It's brutal and valuable. Dude, brutal feedback, difficult but so important. When I had beta readers for my book, I had 2 people who beta read and were just critically eyed people, super smart people. One was a previous pastor I worked with, and one was my dad. And they ripped my book to pieces. And then I had some other people who read it who were more inclined to see it in a positive light. And I think it's good to get both types of feedback. Program or tradition that everyone feels, yeah, absolutely. I think the examples I've encountered with idols in previous churches, the worship tradition, there was an idol at a previous church, such a weird practice that this church had of when it came time to take an offering, all the old people in the congregation would wave like $10 or $20 bills out, and then all the kids who were in service would run around and collect and hold out their hands and be like, money, like give me the money. And they would take that money up to the front and put it in the offering. This was just a tradition that had happened for a long time. The old people loved it. A lot of the parents loved it. The kids loved it. And it's weird. Like when me and a bunch of other people who came into this church on staff encounter this for the first time, we're like, what are we doing? This is so odd. Like, we want to train our kids to give sacrificially. Giving isn't just grabbing money from an elderly person and taking it to the front and being like, I did good. That's not what giving is meant to be. So that was an example of something. And when the change came on that, it was reacted against incredibly strongly. Incredibly strongly. By the way, if you're joining me, welcome. My name is Nathan. I'm an author, and I am working on my second book. So super glad you're here. Let's dive into this 5th issue. Let's zoom out just real quick, and let me put this over here. We're going to come right here. I'm going to zoom out, and yeah, look, we've made some progress. This is good work. So let's come over here, and we've got 0 tolerance for bad behavior. Now, is this really different than idle? I would say this is different for idle, because sometimes people have bad behavior that stems from something other than clearly idolizing something. You might be able to make the argument that idolatry is kind of the root of many sins, but I would say it's probably a little more nuanced than that. So a church that tolerates bad behavior will have long-standing patrons of the church who are poorly behaved, and I would say, medium to extreme as far as their poor behavior. They're poorly behaved, but tolerated for one reason or another. That would be an example of kind of tolerating bad behavior. So long-standing patrons of the church who are poorly behaved, and not poorly behaved in the sense of like you farted in church service, but poorly behaved in the sense of doing something really wrong, like maybe gossiping, just continuously gossiping, continuously sharing other people's private information, continuously, maybe continuously distracting people from doing the right thing. It might even be like in a youth group environment. Maybe the youth pastor tolerates really bad behavior out of his students. Maybe, students are able to sleep around with one another, and maybe the the pastors find out about that and they don't really do anything about that. That would be an example. As, opposed would be that a church could have zero tolerance for bad behavior. So in those circumstances, to say, not that you're kicked out, that's not the point, and maybe we should start with that. Doesn't have to result in disfellowshipping someone. Victor, I'm curious what Christian denomination you're a part of. And I'm also curious, do you do video stuff with your church at all? Okay, long-standing patrons of the church who are poorly behaved but tolerated for one reason or another. And then what's another portrait of someone who has zero tolerance, or a church that has tolerance for bad behaviors? I would say, you know what, this is probably great, is the leaders tolerate bad behavior as a means of ensuring their bad behavior is tolerated. So there's almost a reciprocalness sometimes. Not always. Sometimes that's not what's going on. Baptist, you're your church's video guy. Sick, dude. That's awesome. But that's not your job. Okay. Yeah, so like, do you do video production as your job though, but just not for the church full time? You just help volunteer in that way. That's cool. Okay, one more portrait. I want to make sure I'm having 3. So a church that tolerates bad behavior. This is where I'm kind of stretching my brain. A church that tolerates bad behavior. Maybe we should start by identifying bad behavior. That might be very helpful, correct? Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking. Kind of putting 2 and 2 together. Hey, if you are joining the live stream, welcome. My name's Nathan. I'm an author. I'm working on plotting out my second book. Victor gets to hear the spiel over and over again, but thanks for joining. Would love for you to drop a comment, by the way, and just let me know how you're doing, what your name is, so I can say, hey, this is the first book I wrote, The Imperfect Church. And yeah, we're working on the second one. So we're plotting out this idea of zero tolerance for bad behavior right here. Zero tolerance for bad behavior. Well, I think maybe the difficulty I'm having in this brainstorming of this issue is I need to answer the question, what is bad behavior? Quote unquote, bad behavior. So in this context, obviously, it has to do with church things. Let me expand this. And then I'm thinking not Corinthians. I mean, there's all sorts of passages that talk about this, but in specific, Colossians 3 talks about this. Yep. Put to death, therefore, the components of your earthly nature, agreed, which is idolatry. And that's an interesting connection into idolatry. We are going to go ahead and tag this as Colossians 3 verse, what was it? Verse 5. 3:5. That way we know we referenced it. And then we'll also look at, I think there's a few more little lists here. Also, but now you must, okay, but now, so this will be 8. Filthy language from your lips. I think, are these specific to bad behaviors in church? I mean, insofar as the way we live in our day-to-day life should be the way we're living in church, there's not some sort of actual separation there, right? Any separation there is just imagined. We shouldn't be acting differently. Now this, do not lie to one another. That's interesting. Yeah, that is interesting there. Yeah, undermining the pastor. Preach, my man. I need to get you to talk to some people for me. Oh. Dude, being a pastor is so hard. I'm not saying it's the hardest thing in the world. I'm not saying that it's harder than every other job. I'm not saying any of that, but it is tremendously difficult. I think, kind of thought about this a bit. I think part of the reason that being a pastor is so challenging is that because a lot of people have been in church their whole life, they tend to think that, you know, because they've been thinking about the issue of religion or church or how church should go their whole life, they kind of view themselves as an expert. So I think in the church world, everyone kind of views themselves as an expert. And I think everyone should have opinion. Everyone should take church incredibly personally. Like, it's very, very important thing. But not everyone is an expert in churches. You kind of have both ends of the spectrum. People who try to run church like a business, businessmen who kind of bring their business and they fuse it with the church and they get this kind of warped view of what church leadership should look like. Lots of undermining of pastor in that sense, firing pastor in that sense. And then you have the other side of informality. So people who, you know, live very informally in their own personal life and then kind of bring that same mentality into the church. But yeah, dude, undermining pastors, major concern. Let's look at Galatians 5. Here it is. The acts of the flesh are obvious. I'm just looking up some of the laundry lists of bad behaviors. These are specifically places that talk about. One moment. Let's see if I can do this Bible linker. Yeah, I can't do Bible linker. So this will be Galatians 5:19 through 21. So, you know, some of these sorts of things, I would think anytime the New Testament is identifying a sin, we would call that bad behavior. And then, you know, I think there's an added realm of the bad behavior I'm referring to, typically being a bad behavior that is done both outside and inside the church. So I'm not even so much talking about, you know, maybe someone in their day-to-day life, they struggle with, you know, filthy language, for example. And so when they go to work, maybe they talk with people who they work with kind of in a filthy way that's not beholding of a Christian, someone who is a Christ follower. But then when they come to church on Sunday, they, you know, they stop and they're different. That should be addressed. I'm more talking about someone who thinks that their bad behavior is okay and it's tolerated. I think there are largely tolerated bad behaviors in the Western world. So let's do this as well. Largely tolerated behaviors in the Western world. So I think the biggest example, and this is kind of a hot take, I think. Man, I'm such a bad speller. I think, yeah, this is going to be a bit of a hot take maybe, but the number one example in my mind is actually lying. I think lying is the number one tolerated bad behavior in the world. And by lying, I'm not even talking about lying to other people. In specific, I'm actually talking about lying to yourself. I think that is probably the number one most tolerated sin in the Western world. Lying to yourself. But we're also thinking like gossip is a huge tolerated thing. So I'm talking about, you know, a situation that doesn't pertain to you, but I need to tell you because you're my friend and I have to rant about it. That's gossip. That's not okay. We shouldn't be doing that. We should be going to the person that we have a problem with, not going to other people and talking about it. So we have to completely rewire the way we do that in the world. Other things that are largely tolerated behaviors in the Western world. Let's look through this list here. Anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language, impurity, debauchery, idolatry. I mean, obviously idolatry. Thinking here, idolatry of, casual profanity. I'm going to actually add that to the list. I think that is largely tolerated. Idolatry. Here I'm thinking in view of things like, cell phone, personal image, popularity. I think like the placing of something that our society and our culture really values as prime in our life. You could absolutely properly refer to that as idolatry. You are putting something in the place of God. You are worshiping it. It's taking a prime place of importance in your life. Casual profanity. I think the list could go on and on. So I think this issue maybe comes in the fusion of a sin, which, here we have maybe the two biggest laundry lists of sins here, and here as well as here. So these two, so it's kind of like the fusion of the things that are largely tolerated in Western world and sins. So we have a largely tolerated sin. I think this is where those sorts of behaviors begin, just being commonplace in the church. They're tolerated. No one wants to confront it. What would another one be? Another portrait be? I should say here in the Western church. I'm actually looking specifically in the Western church here. Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, no. Bible is incredibly relevant. Incredibly relevant today. Okay. One more portrait. I'm struggling with this one to find another portrait. So I think in this, let's this is good. Doesn't like, we'd say the church reacts against bad behavior being pointed out or preached against. Now, I'm not talking about preaching in a passive-aggressive way where you're like, well, this person over here did this bad thing. I'm talking about, preaching on the topic of gossip. Well, a church that has openly tolerated and accepted that gossip is just part of life, they're going to have a strong reaction against this, particularly if they're doing this, right? So I think what just struck me is this issue here, maybe more than any of the other issues. We're going to do this. We're going to quickly get into a drawing here. And I'm going to try to quickly snag a heart PNG offline. Don't mind me. I'm just finding a royalty-free heart image, which is easier said than done. There's one. Okay, let's get this in here. Okay, there we go. All right, we've got our heart. So here, the thing that jumps into my brain is that this is a heart issue. And what I mean by that, I think, is you have people with a hardened heart. And these people, I think, are going to react to some of the things we're talking about differently. And then you have people with a soft heart. Victor says it's difficult if there has grown a strong pattern of bad behavior. It will have become normalized and justified and will be harder to point out as a problem. Absolutely. And I think that issue of pointing out a bad behavior comes down to this question, which is, what is your heart? And I think the place that I want to go to look at that would be Matthew chapter 13. Matthew, in the parable of the sower, like, we see this straight up very clearly when he's telling this. Now I want to get on to where he's actually, I think strong pattern leads to hardened heart oftentimes. Maybe the other way, maybe hardened heart leads to strong pattern. Here Jesus is going to explain the parable of the sower. So in the parable of the sower, check this out. When anyone hears the message of the kingdom but does not understand it, the evil one has come and snatched away what was sown in their heart. Okay, so this is not a hard heart. This is just an attack of the enemy and an immature believer. Oh, that's your name. Very cool name. Hello, Mr. Test. Greetings from Alaska. You almost got me with your name. I was so close. But I've been a youth pastor before, and so I saved myself at the very end. What's up, man? Welcome from Alaska. I'm an author. This is an author live stream. We're actually studying and trying to build out some plot maps for my book I'm working on. And right now, we're asking this question of, like, the difference between a hardened heart and a soft heart. And the passage specifically that I want to bring in is, is right here. So, seed sown on rocky ground, hears the word, receives it with joy. He has no root. He remains only for a season. That's not what we have here. Seed sown among the thorns is the one who hears the word, but the worries of this life, deceitfulness of wealth, choke the word and it becomes unfruitful. Seed sown on good soil is the one who hears the word and understands it. So, it doesn't explicitly say. People usually just call you Test. Yeah. I'm going to call you Mr. Test. You made me laugh though, so I'll take it. Laughter is good, man. So here, I'm thinking with regards to the parable of the sower, I think this soft heart is that picture of good soil. So now I understand the context of the parable of the sower is about people coming to believe. That is the specific context of this. But I think there's an application in another way as well, which is, what we do with regards to our belief as an indicator of the position and the tenderness of our heart, I think has a huge and profound application for this other thing as well. I'm rambling. Here's what I mean. If you have a soft heart and you have this good soil, what's going to happen when someone calls out something that you have been doing for a very, very long time? Who is going to respond to that positively? It's a person with a soft heart. Mr. Test, it was God who was responsible. Kinda. There were multiple hardenings. 3 of them were God. Many, many more of that. It says that Pharaoh hardened his own heart. But New Testament, Romans 9, it does talk about God's hardening of Pharaoh's heart. And God's right to do that. And I think we would be wise probably to link that in here in our brainstorming. Yeah, I'm familiar. We've actually been in the book of Exodus today as well, looking at some other parts. But we wouldn't want to misread as well, because there's many, many times where Pharaoh hardens his own heart to Moses' request. So Moses asks way more than 3 times. 3 of the times it says God hardened Pharaoh's heart. And then all the rest of the times it says Pharaoh hardened his heart, or Pharaoh's heart was hardened, in a passive sense, meaning it just happened naturally. Yeah, bro, this is what we're working on. Let me zoom out so you can actually see the whole thing. This is what we've done over the course of, 2 live streams now. We're working on plotting out the different topics that I'm going to cover in my second book. I'll just tell you, Mr. Test, that this is the first book I wrote. It's called The Imperfect Church. I'm working on the sequel to that book. And it's actually a novel that talks about important issues as far as church health and then applies them in the novel. It's very interesting. Passive tense. Yeah, so it's like mysterious. Who caused the hardening? And I think like the answer that Paul gives us in Romans 9, we can just look at that real quick. I don't mind. We can get derailed a little bit. That's okay. This the answer is in Romans 9. So Paul is speaking directly to the Jews, and he's going to launch into this section here called God's sovereign choice. And then he's going to give 3 examples. And one of them is actually going to be this exact question of the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. And it's going to be these sorts of questions. What then shall we say? Is God unjust? Certainly not. The first example is God's ability to use Jacob for the lineage to Christ. He wasn't the firstborn, he was the secondborn. Does God have a right to do that? It kind of misses in today's culture, but that would have been a big, big deal. You don't do that. You don't give the biggest birthright to the secondborn. You give it to the firstborn. But the idea is God has the right. He's the creator. And then we can continue on. Here it is. Therefore, and this is, for the scripture says to Pharaoh, I raised you up for this very purpose, that I might display my power in you, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. Therefore, God has mercy on whom he wants to have mercy, and he hardens whom he wants to harden. One of you will say to me, then why does God still find fault? So literally, Paul wrestles with this exact question. He wrestles with the exact question of the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, and there's answers to that question. So, Mr. Test, not sure if you're a believer, if you're a Christian. Oh, Berean Standard Bible. Are you familiar with that translation? I love that translation. So that's the version I give my kids, and then that I read to my kids every morning. So I love the BSB. But yeah, so very interesting stuff. Let's actually tag in real quick this diagram that we've created, which is it's a hard issue, and our good soil versus our bad soil. Paul, Saul. Yeah. Yep. Depending on when you catch them, right? You had Blue Bible. I think I've heard of that. Tell me about that though, Mr. Test. Okay, bad soil, good soil. So we have our diagram here, and I want to link this in somehow. I guess what I'm getting at with this whole thing is I think the response, I'm going to link it specifically to this issue right here. I think the response, let me delete that. We'll go this way. The response of someone who has good soil and a soft heart is going to be different than the response of someone who has bad soil and a hardened heart. Yeah, Victor, I agree with you. I think the hardening of Pharaoh's heart was special. Special circumstance, special circumstance. I wouldn't want to identify God as hardening someone's heart. I think the point that Paul makes in Romans 9 is that God has every right to. I'm not a Calvinist, by the way. Oh, cool, man. Yeah, 4 translations side by side in columns. Very cool. I'm going to look that up later. The Blue Bible. Yeah, I think what Paul gets at is God has the right to. I'm not a Calvinist. Calvinists would be quick to identify, it's the hardness of your heart. Like, your heart is hard, or God's hardening your heart. It's the effectual call of God. Yeah, I think we ought not identify like God is hardening your heart or not hardening your heart. But the point that Paul is going to make in Romans 9 is he's hardening Pharaoh's heart actually for his glory. And kind of the way that I understand this within like the rest of Scripture and the theology that I've walked away with Scripture from is God is aware of future outcomes of free creatures. So he's aware of not only what Pharaoh is doing in the moment, but what Pharaoh is going to do in the future as well. So it is perfectly consistent to say that God can actively, not passively, but actively harden someone's heart, and that does not infringe with their free will or their choice. So in specific, God hardening Pharaoh's heart does not mean that God caused Pharaoh to not let the Israelites go. Rather, it may have been that God was increasing the hardness of Pharaoh's heart, which is actually when I was memorizing Romans 9, how I chose to memorize it. God's increasing the hardness of Pharaoh's heart because there's all those other times where Pharaoh hardens his own heart in order for him to be glorified. And what does that look like? What does that mean? Well, Pharaoh gets so worked up that he actually chases after the Israelites. And it's this context that provides the first major like battle miracle for the Israelites, where God actually, parts the sea. They walk across it, and the sea envelops and destroys the Egyptians. What would have happened if the Egyptians hadn't been destroyed? We have to look at this through a historical lens as well. Were the Egyptians just going to let this group of 500,000 people go? Like, a month later, might they change their mind? Might they be upset that all of these kids died and all these plagues came and all their crops were destroyed and all these bugs came and their main drinking water source turned to blood? Like, yeah, they're going to be upset. So God is glorified through the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. I'm getting into my pastor mode. I'm getting preachy right now, but yeah, I'm with you, Victor. I don't think once I've ever said to someone, God is hardening your heart. I don't even know that once I've thought God is hardening this person's heart. So I wouldn't want to identify that in someone because I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And I think I would even be bold enough to declare that I don't think this is something that's happening super regularly or super often. Could be wrong on that, but that's kind of my view. Okay, let's continue on here. So church reacts against bad behavior being pointed out or preached against. Okay, Mr. Test says yes, omnipresent, omniscient. So God would know just what is in Pharaoh's heart, but also what will be in the future. Yeah, that I think that would be a good way to describe that. Yeah, you said Gog. I think that would be a fair way to describe that God knows the beginning and the end, and we could get like real in depth with the theology of this. I can spiel, I just can't time. Dude, you're cracking me up from Alaska. Oh man. Yeah, Mr. Test, how deep do you want me to go? Because this is something we could go pretty deep on if you want to have a deep conversation about what is happening with regards to God's knowledge and time. Because there are very interesting things with that ultimately aren't altogether that important, but are very interesting. So if you wanted me to do a deeper explanation, you crack yourself up too. Yeah. If you wanted me to do a deeper explanation, I'd be happy to. If you're curious about more of that. But you might be a veteran. You might know about all this stuff already. So I don't want to explain something that there's no reason to explain. And I'm not a genius by any means or any stretch of the imagination. So I'm thinking here, a person, getting back to the original point, a person who is going to react poorly to a behavior being pointed out in love that they didn't even really remember that they were doing. A person who reacts poorly to that, I would identify as bad soil or hard heart. There's something synonymous there. So I want to just tag in, Matthew 13. I want to tag in Romans 9, and I'm going to tag in Exodus 10. You grew up evangelical? Very cool. Are you still evangelical? Are you in a different place now with your belief? Now you're Pentecostal in Assemblies of God? Very cool, man. Yeah. I'm with it. I'm personally not Pentecostal, but I don't have anything too major to say about that. I rolled with a charismatic worship band for a very long time. Well, I shouldn't say very long, for a couple years. And it was awesome. Loved worshiping with those guys. Learned so much from them. This will be good soil versus bad soil as receptivity. And then this would be hardening heart and hardening heart. So you read everything. I think if there's a good book I could recommend. Let me point out two potential books that kind of got me into Pentecostal theology. So this was number one. This is called Foundations of Pentecostal Theology. Very interesting book. It was the first thing I read that really exposed all of Pentecostal thought in a systematic way. And I was able to kind of quickly pin down and identify, here's the 2 or 3 things within Pentecostal theology that I don't agree with, and the rest that I'm like, yeah, I'm good with this stuff. Nothing too major, by the way. Not trying to call out your belief or change your mind. Would rather be Pentecostal than there's so many worse things. I would count a Pentecostal as someone that I can be arm in arm with in just about every way. Probably in every way. With regards to working together, ministry together, that sort of stuff. And then there's other types where it's this is not going to work out, Okay, what's my description? Yeah, this is a serious work, this systematic theology. It's Guy Duffield and Nathaniel M. Van Cleve. So they worked on it together. And that's very typical for systematic theologies, by the way, for it to be written by kind of a cohort of authors. I have a couple other Pentecostal theology books, but that was really the one for me. I'm going to call this Tolerance for Bad Behavior. Okay. You know what? I'm okay with this. There's probably more that I could do. I feel like this is a little less exhaustive than previous ones, but I think I have some interesting concepts that I can play with there. Let's move on to this final one, and then I'm going to kind of do an overview. Yeah, man. Look it up later. Basically, if I could summarize the couple things that don't make sense to me about Pentecostal theology. It's also typical for a book like that to have one of the authors have a super long, complicated name like the second guy. That's true. Yeah, what's with complicated names in complicated books? This is a pretty technical book, I would say, by the way, Mr. Test. So I don't know, since you say you're a reader, yeah, my book is this one here. It's called The Imperfect Church. Yeah, you can get it on Amazon. I'd love to get your thoughts on it too, Mr. Test. If you'd subscribe and pop back in on another live stream, I'm going to be live streaming a lot over the next 4 or 5 months. I'll hold it up for a little longer for you. So if you want to take a screenshot, it's this, The Imperfect Church. And it's actually like, it's a legit book, you know? So like with like diagrams and like all kinds of cool stuff. And it'll be a page turner. Okay. Yeah. Let's dive into this. Oh, I was gonna say, man, I'm loving talking with you guys, but it is hard to keep a train of thought just because I'm enjoying going back and forth with y'all. The couple things with Pentecostal theology that I couldn't get down with, and maybe you agree with these, maybe you don't agree with these. The first one was their view on why healings sometimes don't take place. So, yeah, and there's a link in the description to that book on Amazon. But the Pentecostal view of why healings sometimes don't take place. And this book lays out kind of a whole systematic list of this might be a reason, this might be a reason, this might be a reason. And essentially, within the Pentecostal theology that this book is spelling out, healings don't take place because of some deficiency, either in the prayer, in the faith of the prayer, or someone who was in the room, or the faith or sin in the life of the person who is being prayed for. So, kind of this idea that when you pray and healing doesn't take place, that doesn't mean, what you're saying, God's will be done. My understanding from this book was that these guys, they wouldn't go, well, it wasn't God's will to heal you. They would actually go, there must be some problem, either with what we did or with you, the person we're praying for, because God didn't heal you. And I actually saw this play out, by the way, and it was what caused me to jump into this. I'll do story time for a minute. This is a very interesting story. First church I worked at, small church, and me and the other pastor were called out to do like a visitation at a house. This lady had come on a Sunday, and she said, my husband is dying. He's in the closet of this house because he was working at the house, and he's actually a criminal. Has warrants out. He can't go to the hospital. He's dying. So we end up going out to this house, and I mean, this man literally on his last leg. And while we were there, his brother came. Yeah. So agree with what you're saying, Mr. Test. And that's what this book, and I understand there's different views and different types of Pentecostal. This book was basically saying, God will always answer yes if you ask right. That's basically what the book was saying. Which I was like, I don't think I can get down with that. So, yeah. So anyways, we get into this closet. We're with this man and his girlfriend. He's got something terminally, like a cancer sort of thing. He's in pain. He's in an air mattress in the closet. And literally, his brother comes right when we're there. And his brother was Pentecostal. And so his brother starts, praying. And, the guy who's on the air mattress sick, dying, is talking about, like, I just need to get hospice. Like, I'm in so much pain. He's, like, hitting the ground. He's in pain. And his brother is saying, no, you're letting in an evil spirit by inviting hospice in. Like, you've already accepted death. You need to have faith that you will be healed. You've already accepted death. His brother was just saying all these crazy things, and I'm just standing back there because I'm going, I don't really know the man. I'm just, a pastor who came out here to pray with and see about if it's possible to baptize this person. And the brother is just saying the craziest of things. And it stemmed out of this just kind of odd Pentecostal theology. Now, Mr. Test, I'm not trying to make an indictment of you. I'm not saying that you believe these things. Not everyone who would call themselves Pentecostal has that sort of a view that God's will for everyone is healing all the time. And many would say what you say, I'm imagining, that God answers the prayer by saying, no, I'm not going to heal you. This book perfectly lines out what this guy thought, who I encountered. And it just really concerned me when I encountered that. So, okay, let's see if we can knock out this last task. You guys are going to have to help me stay on topic here, okay? So, this one is that bad church culture often needs to die. And here I want to bring in this idea, how in church plant world, often it's not wise to merge two churches. One needs to die. Now, I listened to this in a podcast, and it was someone who's, big with church planning. Because when I moved from my role in Florida, it was going to be with basically a church plant. Let's go to my Chat GPT window here, and we're going to go list. I think I'm going to have to, not list. Let me make sure my text generator plugin is on. It is now on. Let's go like this. What? Give me 3 resources that talk about churches needing to, we'll say that talk about church plants not merging with existing and dying churches because of negative church culture. Cite, not cute, cite your sources. All right, let's see what we get here. Okay, I'm going to quickly take a look at these. That's a 404 not found. In fact, I'm just going to kind of skip this, and let's actually just go to books. 3 books. And let's see if there's any books that talk about this. Okay, that's helpful. By the way, this is the right way to use ChatGPT, to use it to find actual sources that you can dive into further. So let me bring in this right here, and let's go down a little bit further. And let's look at summarize the main points of church planting is hard. God uses ordinary people. So we're just taking a look at some things. Okay, so 7 main ideas. Church planting is hard. God uses ordinary people. Importance of gospel preaching. Necessity of prayer. Roles of community. Power of God's sovereignty. Transformative power. So it doesn't seem like there's like a full chapter on this idea, but it does say it talks about it. So I guess there are maybe some books that talk about this. I'm not sure exactly where. And I think, how would I go about finding this in my podcast history? Let me see if I can find it real quick. Of course, my mouse is lagging out like crazy. Let me go into my man, I'll have to look at that later. It was a theology podcast, but let's get back into the actual thing here. In the church plant world, often it's not wise to merge 2 churches. One often needs to die. So I think the idea here is that sometimes like a reset is needed. So we would maybe say a church can get to a place where it's past the point of critical mass. No, you're good, Victor. Yeah, bro. Thanks for tuning in so long. It really does mean a lot to have another author in the stream. So I'm not just talking to myself like a crazy person and that I actually get to engage with someone. So, dude, you are doing me a huge blessing by tuning in sometimes. And yeah, dude, get some good sleep and enjoy your podcast. By the way, everything you sent me, I am going to do a deep dive into. So I appreciate that email and the thought you put into writing that. But God bless you. Have a great night. Sleep well. And yeah, travel safe. So a church can get to a place where it's past the point of critical mass. That's not the right way to say that. A church can get to a place where it's past... There's a clever way to say this. A church can get to a place where healing would cause... Yeah. We'll get the lag fixed, my man. Thanks for pointing that out, too. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known. So a church can get to a place where healing would cause more pain than the church can bear. That is a good quote. We're going to put that in quotes and see if we can find a place for that in the book. And that kind of sums up the whole idea here. Now, how would you identify that? Maybe would be the question. How would you identify that? I think here you would have to do an energy. I think like it'd be kind of a step list, right? So what changes need to take place? How much pain will those changes cause? How much energy and you'd say, does the church have the resources to weather the future? Okay. Maybe this makes sense to be a capstone piece like I was thinking. I think the thing that jumps into my mind here is I know a story of a church health consultant that quit working with the church because he thought they were unhealable. I don't think that was exactly the right idea. That they were a lost cause would be the right way to say it. That they were a lost cause. So, this is someone who's highly respected in the world of church health. Identified, this is a lost cause, I quit. I'm not helping you guys, I'm not consulting anymore. And that's what happened. Is death needed for new life? We don't want to do something silly and necessarily parallel this with the death of Jesus. That's That's not exactly what we're looking for here. But sometimes for new life to come, death must take place. And in churches, that can certainly be the case. So the first other pastor I work with, kind of one of the things I remember him saying a good bit was, we're just kind of waiting for a couple people to die, and we can do what we need to do, or we can do what we want to do, or what God is calling us to do, which is just not great, right? But I think what he was getting at is, sometimes the cold reality can be that what is needed is a complete fresh start. So now we have a few topics here that are somewhat fleshed out that we can actually go a little bit deeper on. What's up, JDM? You say why? You'll have to explain more what you mean. I'm probably about 5-10 minutes from ending the stream here, by the way. You're retracting your messages, so I can't read them, but that's okay. So yeah, anyways, JDM, I'm an author. I write books, and this is an author live stream. So this is my first book I wrote right here. It's called The Imperfect Church, and I'm working on my second book, but a huge part of that is mapping out the major points that I'm trying to make in this book, because although it is a novel, it is not a book that's just for entertainment. It's meant to teach you without you really realizing that you're learning something, or it's, being taught to you. So that requires extreme intentionality. It's honestly harder to write a book this way than it is to just write a book that teaches you things and you're being taught and it's in a teaching format. To write a book that is just a story that actually teaches you tangible things is challenging. So there's a good amount of work that goes into it ahead of time. So that's what we're doing here, JDM. I'm about to end the live stream. Subscribe if you want. I'll probably live stream several more times this week, so I can, keep working on this book. It doesn't take me much more to live stream as it does to just work on it on my own, because I like to think out loud anyways. So yeah, man. Guys, thank you so much. If you tuned in later to watch this live stream or put it in the background or something like that, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. And I'm very encouraged for what I think this book can communicate and how it could help a small church. So we're going to keep working on it, and we're going to ask God to lead us and the Holy Spirit to guide us in this quest and mission. So you guys have a great night. I will see you in